Welcome to the Learnit podcast. I'm Darren Bridgett. I'm in charge of the content development and strategy, and I'm joined today by our illustrious and now author, CEO, Damon Lembi. This is
Nice
the
to be
first
here,
time we've
Darren.
got to do this.
This is the
Wanna-
first time we've ever done it.
Yeah, it's nice. I hope we don't blow it.
Yeah, you won't.
So we're here because, as I mentioned, Damon is an author. He just, but when's this book coming out? It's the 18th, is that right?
April 18th.
And the title is The Learnitall Leader. And where can people find this book, first off?
Amazon,
Amazon,
all the regular places.
Barnes & Noble. And this is your first book, right?
It's my first.
Awesome. Well, to kick it off, can you just give us just like the jacket, the book, what's on the book jacket for this book? Like, what's it about a little bit and why did you write it?
Sure. The book's called The Learnitall Leaders, Mindset, Tools, and Traits. And I wrote it. What inspired me to write it really was I've been working at Learnit now for 28 plus years, and I wanted to bottle up the stories, lessons, and just insights I have to help individuals who want to either grow into a management position or are managers or leaders and evolve. And for those of you out there who maybe don't want to be leaders, but want to learn a little bit more from a perspective of somebody in my position as a CEO running a company for 28 plus years, what we look for in employees and team members. And most of all, I share a lot in the book around how somebody like myself was able to get where I'm at, and that it's definitely out there and available for you to do so yourself.
Yeah, it's great. It was very fun to read. I didn't know you were doing this, and it was, there's so many great stories in it. It's not dry, and you are really, you get a sense of where Learnit is, where you come from, and I really feel like I have a strong sense of you in this company, and honestly, it's like I feel a little more proud even working at Learnit after reading the book. I like the way you divide it up too. You talk about the beginning is like mindset, and then the second half is like, okay, you develop this right mindset, and then the second half is like, how do you take action on these ideas? And in mindset, I think you have you've got humility, curiosity, resilience, and integrity. Is that right?
Correct.
I mean, those are kind of the big ideas that you have.
Those are like the key traits that I try to touch on over and over.
Yeah. So why those? I mean, there's lots of traits out there. Why did those ones seem especially important?
Well, that's a great question. I think that humility, curiosity, integrity, and resilience are really key to success. And they're tough to teach. They're tough to teach as well. So that's what we've kind of built our foundation on, and a lot around our core values. And the stories that you mentioned are a lot of the individuals who worked previously for Learnit or currently we have on our team, and exude those traits. So
yeah,
that's kind of what the focus is.
I like how when you get into the details of these things, it's like on the surface level, yeah, sure, integrity, do the right thing, but what does it actually mean in daily practice? It's those core attributes. It's both knowing, like, what is that person that I report to? What are their challenges? What do they actually care about? And then I need to still do all these same things because, I mean, you said it. You're looking for Learnitalls, not just people who can check boxes, which means
Right.
you have ownership mindset, and you do bring that humility, that integrity, that resilience, and that curiosity, which I also really like that you talked about. In fact, if we can pivot to curiosity, you were saying in the book that you actually credit curiosity as what started the company. Like that when Walt was looking around, it was his curiosity that helped to get us started. To me, if I had to boil everything down to just one idea, I would actually choose curiosity as like the superpower. But you devoted a whole chapter to it early in the book. So why curiosity? Why do you think that's such an important thing?
When Walt, my dad, went in and took a class, he just thought there has to be a better way to do this. So he got curious about what we can do, how this can be done better. And I feel like curiosity plays a big role in everything, because if you have a challenge or a problem or an outcome you're trying to solve, you should be asking yourself, is there a better way to do this? Are there other avenues? How can we get creative? Instead of, I don't think situations are always just black and white. I mean, I think that curiosity helps you open up, have a beginner's mind, and find alternative solutions. I think we've always, and this just isn't me, but we've always had team members at Learnit who have gotten curious, and they've really helped elevate Learnit through finding ways to either be more efficient, build better content, and really just better support our customers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's more fun. I just think it's more fun. It's better than I've been in conversations with high level business people with a ton of experience and other individuals who can really learn from the women and men with a ton of experience. And instead of sitting there and listening and being curious what they have to say, kind of debating like, oh, I don't agree. I think this is how we do it, and it's amazing because that immediately turns the other person off. Like, why should they be sharing their ideas if the person isn't going to be curious and open to what we have to say?
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like it's so important for it to be a combo of curious and open, like that beginner's mind, because it's like we talk about with communication all the time how important it is to be curious and empathic, but it's that curiosity that lets you know, well, what is this person's perspective and what am I missing here? Assume that charitable intent that they're coming from someplace that makes sense, and then you're trying to find out what it is, and then you're not locking into what you think something should be. Which is so easy to do right off the bat. So I think it's everywhere in the organization. It's at the top where you have to maintain that kind of openness instead of just my way or the highway. But even throughout everywhere else in the organization, you kind of have to keep that mindset of why are we doing it this way? Not to be a pain in the ass, but to help be efficient and have that ownership mindset.
I think you want to build a culture, whether you have 50 employees or 50,000 employees, where people remain curious and they're motivated enough around the work that they do that whatever it is they're doing, trying to find ways to be either more efficient or better serve the customers. And leadership can really benefit from having frontline workers and people at all levels who remain curious and don't just come in and think, well, this is how we're doing it. This is how we always have to do it.
Yeah, yeah. Before we get into it too much, though, in case people don't know a lot about Learnit, can you just give us, a couple-minute version of the Learnit story and how you arrived here?
I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, oldest of 4 siblings and great parents. Growing up, sports played a major role in my family and me, and I was fortunate enough in my senior year in high school to be drafted by the Atlanta Braves in the 13th round. And I had my first very tough decision I talk about in the book between taking the journey as a 17-year-old minor leaguer or going to Pepperdine University on a baseball scholarship. I ended up deciding on going to Pepperdine, and at Pepperdine, I struggled and got hurt, ended up leaving, went to Arizona State, had a good career at Arizona State, and was really hoping to play professional baseball. Unfortunately, my dream ended. I wasn't drafted. And right when I was getting out of school, at the same time, my dad, we have a large real estate company, and he was looking for a way to track his portfolio, not on paper anymore, and took one of my sisters, Chelsea, to a computer class to learn Excel. This is 1995. And he thought the class was boring, stale, long, and expensive. And he said to himself, getting back to curiosity, he's like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And that's where Learnit was born. And so, like a lot of great entrepreneurs, Big Walt, as we call him, went out and solved his own problem. And I just was fortunate enough that as my baseball career was ending, Learnit was starting. And I'd never really worked before because I was always playing baseball. And so I was a little intimidated going into our real estate company or hotels. And I went and started off as a receptionist at Learnit. And that was in June of 1995. And here I am 28 years later. And what I talk a lot about in the book is my experiences and stories of successes, but also a lot of the failures and learning lessons along the way that I'm hoping can help others in their journey.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. You certainly shared those moments, learning moments, shall we say, for yourself, and also a lot of great moments for other people in the book too. There are lots of sports stories, but there's also stories about business, about your employees, stories. You got stories about rock and roll, which I know is a big passion of yours. Going to concerts. In fact, could you just take a minute to talk about that? I know this is a big passion for you. What is it about? Like, if you know Damon Lembi, you know live music is a big part of your life.
I don't know, really, to be honest. I've just always enjoyed going to live shows, all different types of music, and I was fortunate enough early on, um, back in the day, to meet up with individuals who had connections to the music scene and have had some pretty great stories. I have a great Guns N' Roses story in the book that was
Yeah.
one of my favorite bands of all time. But
I,
I just love music, and just kind of went from there.
well, I think it's important that you when you add it all up at the end of the day, you're talking about doing the work, do the hard work, put it in.
Right.
That's what we're talking about. But you're also talking about learning at the same time, and it starts to feel like there's a lot to do, and you got to focus. But that you got to live a life outside of work, like you do. You have other interests, have things you really care about. I know you've got a young family now too, and that all that stuff matters. You can't just be you can't live in a little bubble.
Right. No, and I think it's evolved over time too. Like you mentioned, I do have a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old, so my priorities have changed over the years,
Yeah.
and maybe not going to as many concerts or having as many great Learn It get-togethers as we have in the past, also with the pandemic. But I feel like that I've tried to evolve that way as
Yeah.
well, for the better.
So we're going to get into the meat of the book here in just a minute, but this is kind of just for me, honestly. But
Yeah.
you do talk about some of the struggles and the things that helped you learn and grow, but you also had some pretty good success. And so here's this question for me. I play golf a little bit.
Mhm.
When we're about to have the Masters right now. Sometimes you'll see players where their feet are like almost hanging off of like over an overlip onto water, like on the edge of the green, trying to make a putt that's super important. I feel like if that was me, I would fall into the water. Like I'd be so nervous to miss the putt that I'd be the guy who'd fall in the water. And you overcame those things in your career, and you have that moment that I just want you to tell it because I love the story of hitting that home run in the College World Series. That was a significant home run that was written up in the papers. At the risk of, well, can I hear the story? That's all.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what you're referring to is, and my poor wife says she's heard the story so many times. So Gary, you could turn this off and turn it back on a little bit. So in my junior year, we were in the College World Series,
Yeah.
and we were the first game and on CBS. We were main focus because our coach Jim Brock was in the final stages of a liver cancer, and he came to the games, and he was sitting there. And I was pretty nervous. Here we are in Rosenblatt Stadium in front of about 25,000 fans, and my first at bat, I struck out on 3 pitches, and I said, "Oh my gosh, it's going to be one of these days," And so I went back to the dugout, and then I came up again a couple innings later, and I got a 2-1 fastball, and I hit it to left center field. And keep in mind, I was never a fast runner, but as I was starting to round first base, I can see that the center fielder, Bruce Thompson, who's a great ball player, reach up to try to catch the ball. And I couldn't see if he caught it or if he didn't, but his glove came off. And if you know anything about baseball, you know that if the ball is attached to your glove but not on your arm, then it's live play. And so I ran as fast as I could around second. And as I was coming towards third, my third base coach, who was a great mentor for me, John Pearson, is like, "Hey, the ball went out of the park. It's a home run. Enjoy your home run trot. You hit a home run in the College World Series." So I get home, everybody congratulated me, and we went on to win the game. And I still remember, as I'm leaving the dugout, Coach Brock was sitting in the same chair as he was, and he loved to give me a hard time, but he kind of pointed at me and said, "Come over here, Lembi. So I came over, and he could barely speak, and he whispered in my ear. He said, that home run trot of yours in the fourth inning, it was the worst friggin' home run trot I've ever seen. Ugliest friggin' home run trot I've ever seen. I looked at him, and I'm like, I couldn't tell if he was, giving me a hard time or dead serious. And then he said, gave me the sign to go away. And that was the last time I ever saw Coach Brock in person. He didn't make it to the next game and died about a week later. But what a courageous human being he was. And I was so grateful to be there on that team and be able to learn from him and tell the story now for probably the 6,000th time.
Yeah.
Which was fun.
It's a great story. You learn from both, the failures and the successes. Something I think is really interesting about this story, though, too, is it's not like you didn't have nerves. You were
so nervous.
And the first time you felt like maybe it wouldn't work, but you were able to work through it. And I think sometimes people, when they come to us for learning, I want you to make it so that I don't have anxiety. Mm-hmm. And it's not that exactly. It's a balance of being able to live in a healthy way and live with some of that stress in a positive way and still get to where you want to go. And it's hard sometimes for people to manage that in a way that feels like they can do it and also feels healthy, like they can take it.
Absolutely.
It's a great story. Early in the book, right off the bat in the beginning, you talk about how our company's name became your personal mission, which is very much how I know you. And what's so interesting to me about that is you contrast that with being a know-it-all. Learn-it-all is what you want to be, know-it-all is what you don't want to be. But for you, with this lifetime of learning, you could have ended up a know-it-all. And I know that's not how you are. So that's kind of my question. How do you stay in that beginner's mind and just always stay open as a learner instead of just being that I know everything, let me show off?
Well, great questions. And let me start by saying I've had my know-it-all moments. I think we all have. And as time goes on, I feel like I've gotten better at staying open and having a beginner's mind. Learn it. I'm passionate about learning, and I've really had the great opportunity to learn from whether it's great coaches or mentors and people like yourself, Darren, throughout the years at Learnit. And it's really difficult to run a business, to be in a family where you're set in your ways and then you're the only direction can go. And I've really learned over time too that there's been certain times where I've thought sure of myself in a certain way, so-called know-it-all, and that others had better diverse opinions a lot of times. So it's taken practice, and I'm really focused on spending more time being open and seeing what's out there.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's not an easy thing to do to stay open and to not get locked in to what you think and to hold on to it. So I appreciate that you bring that up. Something else you talk about early in the book is going all in, which is how important it is to be really passionate and committed, which again is the man know to be really true about you. You talk about some obstacles, the imposter syndrome, the lucky curse, which I think is interesting, and I haven't heard that talked about very much. You can talk about it more if you want. But what I really liked is that underneath all of that, you talked about fear being the real essential ingredient. And I think a lot of people in business are, especially leaders, are even afraid to really talk about fear because you've got to promote a big positive image. But you're not afraid to go there. Talk about fear and really talk about your own journey in overcoming fear. Could you just say a little bit more about that, about fear and your journey in overcoming some of these fears that were holding you back?
Sure. I think at some point everybody's fearful of something, and those who try to pretend or act as they're not, people, you can kind of see through that. So kind of like what I talked about in the book is identifying those fears and addressing them and trying to work through them, and I talk a little bit about a term purposely awfulizing, where it's looking at the situation and saying to yourself, well, I'm taking on this new job. Okay. Worst case scenario, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen? It doesn't go well, either get demoted or fired. Hey, well, is that the end of the day? I mean, is that the end of the world? No, it's not. So it's looking at things and putting things really, Darren, in the big picture. There are people out there who have a lot. I'm not trying to minimize my fear or somebody else's fear, but putting it out there for what's going on out in the world. There's a war going on. There's a lot of struggle out there. So, hey, my challenges may be difficult to myself, but there's a lot of people out there who have fear and other things they need to overcome too. So that's pretty much how I've worked to address it over time. I mean, it's difficult, it's difficult. And sometimes the best way to do that is through going all in. And what I talk a little bit about in my book is a 3-step approach. One is hard work. This is after you've already identified what the fear is. One is through hard work. And I'm not saying you need to put in 14-hour days and 7 days a week, but you need to put in hard, dedicated work. Number 2 is focus. A lot of times when you're fearful of something, you procrastinate and maybe you don't want to address it. But it's tough enough to deal with what you have. So you need to focus and hit it head on. And then number 3 is continue learning. And sometimes don't even take yourself too serious. If you fall down, you make a mistake, learn from that mistake and keep moving forward. So those are what I've used in my life to deal with imposter syndrome or fear. And sometimes it's like, if through the challenges, we've been through at Learnit, where over really 3 recessions, a lot of times people would say, are you worried? I'm like, well, of course you're worried and fearful for what's going on, but worrying's really not going to get you anywhere. Addressing it and giving it your best effort is really what my advice is and what I've tried to do throughout the years.
I think that's so great. And I like that there was that clear kind of walking people through how to deal with this stuff. And it is a big deal when you're leading a company and you've got to make some big moves and make decisions all day long and people are looking to you. It's easy to let fear be the driver and not recognize it, because it's not that it's just that ability to say, okay, is this really true? Am I right about this? Or is this actually coming from fear somewhere for me and then for other people in the company, and then be able to move past it, which is such a good thing. And I think a lot of people just skip that step and they just hold on to like, this is what I know, this is what it's going to be true, and we're just going to do this thing, or we're not going to do this thing because really I'm just too afraid. So you had an amazing college sports career. Like you've applied a lot of those lessons you learned early in life to your role leading Learnit and being a Learnitall leader. What advice would you have for young people when it comes to sports and helping them achieve their goals and live up to their potential?
Great question. Just the other night, I was having dinner with an acquaintance, now more of a friend, who was 500th in the world in tennis. He's also my age, around 50, and now he's in the finance world. And we were just talking and sharing stories about sports. And I didn't even mention to him that I wrote a book and it's coming out. And he just, he turned to me and he said, I learned more from playing tennis and competing than I did at Wharton Business School. And I kind of shook my head and I kind of agreed, in a sense where it's like sports has been able to help teach me discipline, camaraderie, collaboration, and really, really great athletes too are also able to learn how to be coached, so that they're able to take advice and implement it and be open to, and that's what sports has helped with. And more than anything, resilience. We play baseball, for instance, 7 out of 10 times you fail. So you just got to kind of get back up and do it again. And like my buddy mentioned, was the mental aspect of sports is huge. And all of that can be translated into the business world as well. So I was really fortunate. I didn't go, both of us said this, neither of us went to, Harvard or Stanford, a graduate school, business school, which is awesome. But we got a graduate level education out in Division I sports and professional sports. So that's really how I tie it back to. And you don't have to play at a Division I level. You can be a high school or junior high school sports and still learn quite a bit too.
I don't know that I learned resilience as well as you in my very limited sports career. I didn't bounce back as well. So
Yeah, but
there's,
tell me a little bit how, I mean, you do have a pretty prolific acting career, and acting, just like sports, Darren, there's a lot of failure in it. What did you learn from, from your acting career?
yeah. Well, it's interesting. I felt like I had a much harder time with resilience in sports than I did with acting. And part of it, I think, is because I started acting. I did some acting when I was very young. And I just had confidence because I had a positive experience around it from the very beginning. Like I knew how to be in front of an audience, and it just felt like that was comfortable and easy. And then what I would do kind of later in my career is I felt like I couldn't lose in a certain way because if I didn't get the lines perfectly right, if I forgot my lines, or if something happened on stage that was unexpected, I had disaster proofed myself. Like I knew what it was that I was talking about,
Right.
and I knew how to stay in the moment, and I trusted myself to be able to turn those moments sometimes into almost the best moments in a play. So you kind of like learn to. I don't know that you can do that as much in sports because in acting you're kind of selling a story as opposed to like, no, I have to win the point. I have to actually, I have to hit the ball, over the fence to get that home run for us to win the game. It's pretty definitive. In acting, you're kind of just shaping a story, and it's a little bit more emotional. So I always felt like I had an out.
Great.
I want to have a question for you. One more about on the sports topic is there's this great line in Ted Lasso where one of the players has missed a penalty. No, they hit a penalty kick that like killed the mascot, and now he's got a block just about penalty kicks, not about anything else, but can't make penalty kicks. And Ted Lasso's advice is to be a goldfish because goldfish has a 10-second memory, which is really great, fun advice. But it's still like that. How do you do that in practice, though? Like, so for you as an athlete, how did you build that muscle to like let yourself forget about those times that you struck out? I mean, I don't know how you do that. It's got to be so hard.
It is incredibly hard, and I've been fortunate to become friends with Steve Sachs, who is the famous second baseman for the uh, Los Angeles Dodgers, amongst other teams, and a lot of people know Steve as someone who had a hard time throwing the ball from second base to first base.
Oh,
What
right.
a lot of people don't realize is that I believe he won the Golden Glove after that and went on and had an amazing career. And we've had conversations around that before. And you just have to work your way through it. You have to work your way through it, and you have to also kind of reflect back on the success that you've had, and also, so hey, I have done this before, and visualize yourself being successful as well. So it's difficult, in sports, and sometimes in business. In baseball, sometimes it looks like a golf ball coming up to the plate and you can't hit anything. Other time it looks like a balloon, and it's mostly mental. And it's just it's a challenge, but it's something that the great athletes, great musicians, and great business people learn to work through.
You have so many great stories in this book, and they really span everything. I mean, there's a lot of sports stories, but you've got great stories about Learnit, really great stories about people I know still working at Learnit, colleagues and former colleagues, and weathering, the financial storms, because you've had Learnit going for a while. You also have a lot of great stories about Walt, your dad, Big W, and who comes across as this very successful and kind of larger than life figure. So I just wanted you to be able to, like, is there any stories about Walt that you left out? And I know Walt was a really good storyteller. Like maybe just give you a moment to talk about Walt and stories in general.
Great question. So Walt was my best friend, and my first true mentor, and he was also very innovative, which, quite frankly, I don't feel like I have that same innovative gene that he does. He would come up with these amazing ideas, and a lot of times he'd go out and he learned to settle his own challenges. Like, that's how Learnit came about, which I talk a little bit about in the book. Is that he went and took a class with my sister Chelsea, realized early on that it was boring and stale, and decided there's got to be a better way to deliver training at a cost-effective price for everybody. And that's really where Learnit came from. A story about Walt that I didn't talk about in my book was, here he is, this really successful business person. And I mentioned in my book that he used to let me tag along and go to these meetings with high powered bankers and other real estate guys and everything. But when Learnit first kicked off, one of our main forms of marketing, now remember, this was 1995, and so the internet was in its infancy. And one of our main forms of marketing was something that he learned from his dad, Frank Lembi, my grandfather, who was an absolute character, who was one of the toughest gentlemen I ever met, fought in both theaters, the Pacific and Europe in World War II. And one of the ways that they always marketed their business was through flyers, passing out flyers. And I remember this was probably early in 96, 97, we'd have tens of thousands of flyers. And my dad would load up the Toyota van at the time with a couple of my buddies who were all in their 20s. And we'd drive around San Francisco. And here was Walt Lembi putting flyers on cars, with all of us, and he would just roll up his sleeves and do the work. And that's really one of the things that I loved about my dad was he wasn't afraid to roll up his sleeves. And then he was also, and do the work. And also he got along with everybody. Whether it was the barista at Starbucks or, some VP in finance, Walt was, he was able to adapt and talk to everybody. But those were great days. We still tell the stories about, hey, remember when we all jumped in your dad's car and passed out flyers around San Francisco?
Yeah. I love that. That's great. The having that tradition of great stories is so important in a business too. Like, don't forget your stories and lean into them. It's such a great example, and a great example of leading by example.
And also, I think, Darren, you're a great storyteller. You're a great storyteller. But one thing, especially when it comes to business stories, I found is sometimes it's not necessarily the words and what you're saying, but it's how you come across. Do you come across as being authentic? Do you come across as being motivational, without being over the top? So that was another thing about my dad is, whether it was in between soccer games, or I'd go to see him when he was the CEO of Continental Savings, or Savings and Loan, and he would have his team, hundreds of people in the room, and he would just be himself and just talk them through, and you'd say, we're going to do this, and he set the vision. And I can't tell you, looking out into the audience, how proud I'd be of him, of everybody getting excited, and everybody always got behind him, in the work he did. And so that was always something that I wanted to emulate, was his form of, motivating his team.
Yeah. That's awesome. It's clear that attitude is like a big part of this for you. That personality of Big W, your dad, but he was in the trenches with people too. And something you talk about in your book when it comes to being a leader, there's the first part of the book, which is really about the mindset and the attributes. You talk about things like integrity, resilience, curiosity. Talk about integrity, which I also really appreciate. But then in the second book, you focus more on some practical things. And one of those is attitude, is like getting the right people on the team, right? Mm-hmm. You talk about coachable players. In fact, I think you tell a story about letting somebody go who had everything on the resume right, even could have been a rainmaker, but if they don't have the right attitude, if they're not what you call a coachable player, like somebody who also has that learn it all attitude,
absolutely,
know it all,
absolutely,
you're not going to put up with that. So can you talk about like why that's important? And it feels like a risk for people to let go of somebody who's really good. Why is that attitude so important to you in business?
Well, I would take somebody who's coachable over past experience any day of the week. I really would, because for several reasons. One is the work climate that we're in is always evolving. So what worked yesterday or last year or 5 years ago may not work in the future. And we all have to be able to lead by example, but also have an open mind and being willing to adjust, learn, and change. And you can have people come from your same industry who come to work for you, and they're like, well, this is how we did this there. This is how we did it there. Well, you know what? And they get stuck in their ways. I want individuals and leaders in our company who are flexible, open-minded, and willing to say, hey, you know what? Maybe there is a better way to do it. Like I talk about in the book, leaders aren't born, in my opinion, and they're not really made. I like to say they're in the making. They're continuously evolving in their career. And
Yeah.
I think that that's more exciting too,
Yeah.
than have somebody who's reached their peak and they think they know that they know it all,
Yeah.
and also coachable people tend to take themselves less serious and are open to making mistakes and admitting mistakes, which I think
Yeah.
is huge.
Yeah. They're kind of just more fun to be around, aren't they?
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and for us, it's important because it's consistent with who we are. Like if you join Learnit, this is who you have to be. This is what's expected of you, and it's part of that culture. It's part of our identity.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier about your colleagues. The thing that's motivated me the most over the past close to 3 decades, if you can believe it, are the people that I've been so fortunate to surround myself with.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, incredible talent, both that's with us right now and individuals who started with us and now have C-level roles at companies from Autodesk to their own startups.
Yeah.
And it's amazing being able to get that level of talent on your team, help and being part of their journey.
Yeah.
And so, I think that definitely don't have any kind of secret sauce or secret power, as they say, but I've been really fortunate to work with and attract and retain for several years great talent, and that's elevated me and wanted me to continue to grow and evolve by surrounding myself with people who are quite frankly smarter and better.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something then that you mentioned, I think is interesting to contrast with this, because it's pretty obvious that you care a lot about the people that work with you, and there's that level of passion and commitment, and you invest in them. But you also say that work shouldn't be exactly like family, like it's different. So how do you draw that distinction between, I'm invested in these people, I care, I want to know about their personal lives a little bit. There's a little bit more of a personal relationship, not purely professional. But you also say it shouldn't be the same as like, this is my family.
Correct. I mean, I look at it this way. I think I originally, well, I've heard it before, but there was the woman who was the HR leader at Netflix, wrote a book and talked a lot about it. Can't remember her name off the top of my head, but I believe it. I can never outgrow Uncle Bob. I don't have an Uncle Bob, but you can't outgrow your family. They're always going to be your family,
Yeah.
And when it comes to your team, your employees, there's sometimes there is a point where they outgrow Learnit, or the next step up for them is not going to get you to the next level, and that's where it's more like a team than an actual family. Loyalty, look, I feel like I'm a pretty loyal and good friend to a lot of our employees and whatever, but when it comes to Learnit, it's okay. I tell stories in the book about individuals who work for us for 15, 20 years, but it was time for them to move on and evolve, and they hit their stride at Learnit, and then they hit their ceiling, and it was time for them to get maybe uncomfortable, get out in the workforce. And one of the individuals I talk about in the book, I mean, is just so successful now, and again, I'm proud to be part of his role. So does that make sense, kind of how I look at it, the difference between a team and what's your
No,
thoughts?
yeah, I think it's exactly right. It is a hard thing to do because, I mean, it's Peter Drucker. Like you don't want to be their family exactly, and especially if you're CEO, you can't afford to be like, kind of too much like friends, because it becomes a bit of a weird line. But you also need to be personally invested and allow that's how you create a strong culture and know who the people are. That's how you can give, we talk a lot in our company in the product side about psychological safety, and that ability to like, be direct with people. You earn that with psychological safety, which means that you've taken a personal interest in people's lives and you care. And that's how people can trust that you have their best interests in mind when you're giving them feedback and you're arguing ideas. But it is a little bit of a weird balance.
It's important, and I have two kind of stories around that. One is, you don't want, well, the first one's not a story, but you don't want yes people around you who just tell you you're always right. You want people who feel comfortable to come to you and say, you know what, Damon, I disagree with what you have to say here, and then have a open conversation. And one story I talk about in my book is a relatively new COO, Ben Spike. who's great. And at one point, Ben contacted me and he's like, hey, I feel like you've been kind of micromanaging me over the last couple of weeks or so. And I just want to let you know that that's really not, that's not the best way I feel. Doesn't motivate me. It doesn't motivate me. And I was wondering if there's something we could talk about and get better at. Now, and again, this has been a process for me too. 15 years ago, I probably would have got super defensive over a conversation like that. But these days, I sat back, took a breath, and I really listened to what Ben had to say, because at the end, and listened and heard him out. And I feel like at that point, it also gave him the confidence to speak his feelings to me. And he told me several weeks afterwards, he's like, my previous company, you can never do that. You can never challenge management or whatever, even though he was on the management team. So it's a skill that I've tried to learn over the years, and being open and creating a psychological safe space for your team is important. The other story I had around that was, sometimes you have a team and there's one person in a meeting who's always speaking up all the time. Always speaking up and talking.
That's me.
Right.
That's
No.
me. Yeah.
But in a way where everybody else just kind of sits there and backs down and doesn't say anything. That's not a fantastic environment either, because you're disregarding other ideas that other people may have. They say, well, I'm not going to talk because so-and-so, she's talking all the time. Right. So I feel like we've also gotten better over the years is having a coachable group of people who are better listeners and open to other ideas. If you get, like I said, if you get in a meeting and you have a know-it-all in there and she's saying, this, and this, everybody else just kind of sits back and says, I'm just going to let so-and-so speak.
Yeah. I think that is something I need to I'm always trying to work on that myself. I really like learning like you do, but then I get attached to my ideas. I need to learn to let go. So something that happened, and actually it would be interesting to hear your perspective on some of these things. Where do you think learning is going now post-pandemic? And I bring it up because you talk about, I love this expression, management by wandering around. Back in the old days, Learnit had that great office, and I know everybody did a lot of fun things together. It was before my time. Take it away. You can't wander around anymore. And the pandemic changed a lot of things. So I guess it's two questions. Like, how is that for you leading your company? And where do you think the future of learning is post-pandemic?
Well, good question. To start off, that Tom Peters, management by wandering around, MBWA, I think that's what it is. In his great book, In Search of Excellence. And that's something I've always tried to model, is just when we were all in person together, is just walking around, speaking to receptionists, talking to the sales team, going out to lunch with the instructors and hearing other people's perspectives. And it's amazing. Post-pandemic, obviously there's a lot more remote work or hybrid work, and it's more challenging. It's more challenging. And to be able to do that, I think it's just setting aside time and having individual conversations, just going out of your way. I try to make a habit of contacting 2 or 3 people a week and just reaching out to them, see how they're going, what are they seeing, and still learning a lot. And periodically, at least quarterly, trying to get everybody or certain teams together where we can work together in person. I think that remote work works just fine. But I do think that there's the opportunity to collaborate in person is fantastic. I think it's fantastic. So trying to find those types of opportunities. To answer your question about learning moving forward, it was funny when not funny, but when the pandemic first happened, a lot of our customers would come to us and say, there's no way we can learn emotional intelligence virtually, or how to do a difficult conversation. And when people realized that the pandemic wasn't going to end anytime soon, they slowly were okay with delivering their trainings virtually. And not only did they realize that it can be successfully done virtually, but it was also, especially at a time where people needed social connection, it was a great motivator for them. And as training moves forward, I look at it like virtual doctor's visits. I don't know what the stat was, but prior it was maybe a very small percentage of doctors' visits were virtual. Since then, it's exponentially gone up, and people have kind of gotten just indoctrinated, in whatever the word is, into virtual doctors' visits. So I think that there's a ton of opportunity, and the corporate training is, $100 billion industry, and the younger generations, the Gen Z and everything, are really demanding the opportunity for personal growth. And I think with that, with the technology that's coming out, whether it's virtual reality, some of the on-demand work and wraparound stuff that we're even trying to do at Learnit, I think that training is always continuously evolving. And with that being said, I don't think there's ever really going to be a substitute for a live instructor class, whether that's virtual or in person.
Yeah. Nice.
But I think it's exciting. I think that I look at Lucy and Wally and their opportunity to grow and evolve personally and professionally in the upcoming years is going to be exciting.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, a couple little bit more, maybe rapid fire question. You can take all the time you want, but I'll take less time. Here's a question for you.
Okay.
Because of your position as a learning professional, should you work on improving weaknesses or elevating strengths? Which do you think is better?
I'm a big fan on improving strengths, working on strengths.
Yeah.
And to me, you look at it like, when we go out and find team members, we look to try to find great people and figure out what their strengths are and point them towards those positions. Now, I'm not saying you can't work on your weaknesses, but I think you get a better impact focusing on the strengths and elevating those, because typically if it's something somebody's strong with, they typically tend to enjoy that more, so I would focus on strengths.
This is more bang for your buck in a way.
You get more bang for your buck.
Yeah. I said I wasn't going to talk, but now I'm going to talk.
No. I wanted to ask you, what's your take on it? Do you focus on improving the weaknesses, or do you go at the strengths?
I was so focused on improving my weaknesses when I was younger that I felt like in retrospect, it was kind of a waste. Like I tried to do all these things that I just wasn't good at instead of focusing on things that I could do. I don't know if you know that Cal Newport book about like what sort of job you should do. And he talks about like, do what you're really good at instead of trying so hard to do something else. Like, what are you already successful at? And then live your life. And I do kind of wish I'd taken that advice a little bit more to heart. I do think you get more bang for your buck with the strengths-based approach. It doesn't mean you ignore your weaknesses.
No, you don't want to ignore your weaknesses, but focus on strengths. Even when it comes to reading books, one thing I've gotten better at is, if I'm reading a book, in the past, I just try to finish it, no matter what. But if I'm struggling to get through the book, now it's like, put it down and read something else. Focus on, again, something you're passionate about or that you're strong in. To give you an example, currently we have a gentleman on our sales team, Nick Cruitt, who's awesome. And he's awesome, especially at account management and developing customers. He didn't love cold calling. He didn't love cold calling and the outbound reach. He would do it. But I thought to myself, okay, what should we spend time with Nick? Should we spend time with him on, practicing his objection handling and cold calling? Or should we put him in a position where he can evolve as an account director, which he's taken that role to a new level? So that's kind of an example of focus on somebody's strengths.
That's great. And you do that. It's that idea that you take coachable players, like the people you want on your team, and then find the right fit for them. And you let that be part of what evolves the company, which I think is, I'll tell a quick acting story. When you're acting, you're on set, you got to hit your marks, and especially if it's like this super teeny little thing where like the light's going to hit a certain place. And there are sets where you go, and as an actor, they just tell you got to do this. And so suddenly you're working with an actor, and I'm looking over here, I can't even see their face. And it's really hard to work as an actor. The best sets are the ones where you go on set, it's just the actors, it's just the directors, and then the director of photography just watches, and you work out the scene so that you're working out from like, what do the characters want to do? What's the story really about? And then you light that instead of the other way around. And I kind of feel like that's your approach with people in the company. Like, let's get the right people and then adjust a little bit to them instead of force them into these little boxes.
Well, I think you can the key traits I really look at when hiring individuals, and I try to, lead myself, are humility, curiosity, integrity, and resilience.
Yeah.
That's really what they are. And a lot of that is very tough to teach. So if you could find individuals that have that and also are in line with our core value, you can teach them skills. I mean, that's what we do. I mean, we're a learning organization. And as you know, Darren, we invest heavily in our team for learning opportunities.
Yeah.
But it's tough to teach humility or
Yeah.
curiosity
Yeah.
and integrity, So you find great individuals, and then you try to mold them into, or deliver them into a position where they're going to have the most chance for success.
Yeah, I think it's great. It is hard to find those people because it's hard to put those things on a resume in a way where you know if it's really true. So, I mean, and you don't always hit it right, but any advice on how to find those?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say, and there's studies that prove this, so it's not just me saying it, is referrals. Individuals who work at Learnit, who refer other individuals. So people who have and exude those characteristics, those traits, reaching out to their community and their network, because they know whether or not somebody will be a good fit at Learnit, and what we stand for and our core values. So that's really, if you built the culture that you want, which is a hard thing to do, but if you built the culture that you want, and then it's asking the individuals on your team to go out and help recruit and find other individuals to bring into your team. That's my number one. I have other tricks, that just questions you could ask around an interview process. What's the last book you've read? What hobbies do you have? Just to try to get an idea of where people come from. But number one, I really like looking for internal referrals.
It's awesome. So Damon, Learnitall Leader, great title. It makes really a lot of sense that would have been your approach around this book, because you've been, that's your role. But a lot of people who might be listening to this might not be a leader yet, or maybe they're not even so much interested in being a leader, or they're an L&D professional. What can people take away from this book who aren't leaders yet?
Well, first of all, my definition of a leader isn't someone who has direct reports all the time. I think that you can be a leader as an individual contributor. Absolutely. So what I feel that people who maybe don't aspire to be a leader of a team or a manager is, for one, it kind of gives you the insights, I think, of what a CEO in my position has to, think about and wants from their team. So especially if you're new in the workforce and you're coming in and you want to, okay, I want to really do well and be successful and move up, getting the insights of what's important to somebody in my position, I think is a great opportunity. Also, we talked about in my book, imposter syndrome and decision making. Those are tools and that everybody has to learn and get better at. So I think that there's a great opportunity, and I do my best, really try to share some of my successes, but also some of the failures and things that we could have done better.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things I love about this book is it makes it so great for anybody who joins the company in this point forward. It's like, you really know, okay, this is who we are and what we stand for. So learning, obviously, is what we're talking about. It's such an important thing to do. And you have so many great examples of leaning into learning. How do you also find time to get the work done? If you have such an open mindset, if you are so curious, you're constantly sourcing new information. How do you balance that with actually finding the time to get things done and maintaining for you that direction of the company instead of just getting lost in all learning?
Well, great question. I think obviously learning is important, right? But at the end of the day, you have to execute. And I talk a lot about it early on in the book about going all in, and sometimes when you decide on, you look at different options, then you decide on a direction, then you go all in on that, and then you got to get laser focused and take it to implementation. Now there are times where you go all in and you look at it and you think you've done all the learning you've needed, and it doesn't work out, And one of the things I've gotten much better with over the years is avoiding the sunken cost fallacy, where you've invested in something, you spent months on it, and you want to push it to the finish line, but new learnings have come up and you realize that it's really not the best choice anymore. It's a difficult thing to do, but sometimes you just have to cut your losses and move in a different direction. But learning is fantastic and everything, but you also, as a leader especially, you have to get serious and go all in and execute, and have a team around you that helps execute.
Yeah, definitely. No, you do have to go all in, but there's that expression. I don't know. It might be an Adam Grant one, but it's strong opinions lightly held.
Exactly.
So, yeah, which is such a great.
And I also like the one there. It's like, when the facts change, I change my mind.
Yeah, that's right.
You just have to do that, right? If it turns out that you're going down the path and maybe you didn't have all the facts, or maybe the facts aren't exactly what you thought they are, then change your mind, go in a different direction. Nothing wrong with being wrong.
Yeah, you have that in the book. And I think you credit John Maynard Keynes with that. Although you say it's unsure.
Unsure, but a lot of people say that, but it's a really good one.
Yeah. So how do you curate where what to learn and read? I mean, there's so much information out there. There's more books published every year than any human being could read in their entire lifetime. And there's a lot of disinformation out there and bad information out there. Like, how do you curate not just what you learn from the people and stuff, but like what to read, what to learn?
Well, my advice that I always give,
work with Learnit first.
I would say my advice that I always give to the people that I mentor, especially new people into the workforce, is read as many biographies as you can. I think biographies are amazing. I mean, you can take some of the most successful people in the world. I just got done reading a great biography on Nelson Mandela, another one, and it's just, there's so many learning lessons that you can get from reading biographies. So whether you're a big reader or not, maybe set a goal of reading one biography a quarter. I try to read one a month, which is much more difficult now with two little ones. As far as what I curate to read, or learn, I like to just, I have certain, CNBC, and I like to stay current in world events. And so I just try to focus on maybe 20 minutes of consistent reading a morning, or listening to podcasts. And really, when you're out about with friends or people you network with, just asking questions and really kind of shutting up and listening to what they have to say. I think you can learn so much from others. I mean, so that's kind of how I go about it.
I like what you bring in there, and this actually seems consistent with a lot of things that you talk about, is you cast a wide net. Like, you're not just looking at, well, what do other business leaders say, or what do other people.
Absolutely.
I know you look at that stuff because we sit down together as a group and look at it, but you're looking at like everything. You brought your sports in. I know you like historical figures, so you cast a pretty wide net in terms of where you're collecting information.
I think that's really important. I mean, I think that you would bore yourself if all you did was read business books all the time. So I really try to diversify. I mean, I love reading fiction. I'm a huge Michael Connelly, Jack Reacher fan, and I also love reading about past wars and great leaders, whether they are coaches in sports or world leaders. Just have a Margaret Thatcher book that I was just looking over. So there's all types of different, and I think you should really kind of diversify your learning, and try to stay away from some of I do my best to try to stay away from some of the garbage on social media. I don't think, like you said, disinformation, it's all around us, but try to focus your intentions on being productive.
Yeah. I think of it as that fox and hedgehog thing. That the hedgehog knows one thing really well, and a fox knows a little bit about a lot of things. And there's so much emphasis to be like a hedgehog if you're starting a business or whatever. But sometimes people undervalue the importance of being a fox. Like, those are often the people who make the best predictions. They often bring the most creativity and that sort of first principles thinking, where suddenly you see something in a different way. And so in that sense, cast that wide net, be a little bit of a fox. I do think that's something we try to do at Learnit.
Absolutely.
What advice would you give young people who are just starting out in their careers, and maybe they're aspiring to be a leader, or maybe they're starting out, they just want to be a good worker. They want to be that person who gets hired by you, and maybe they don't have that many credits on their resume. Like, what's your advice for young people starting out?
My advice is to be open, to put yourself out there and be open. Go on as many interviews as you can, and learn from each one of them. And there's a great book out there called Range. I think the author is David Epstein. It's a fabulous, fabulous book. I don't think you need to lock yourself into one career the whole time, but I do think when you do get out in the world, give it your best shot. Work hard. Don't be constantly looking for other avenues or other ways to other jobs, and take advantage of when you get hired. Take advantage of, if you have the opportunity to meet in person, hopefully, if not, virtually, with senior leaders, people who have 20 years experience, 10 years experience. Pick their brain. That's really my advice. Go in and do your best. Don't take yourself too seriously, but work hard. You're gonna make a lot of mistakes, and I've worked alongside a lot of Ivy League people and Stanford, and those are awesome schools, and people, they're great. They turn out great people into the workforce. But if you're from a junior college or a state school, by no means should you feel like you don't have the opportunity to be successful. And that's one of the main reasons why I wrote this book was,
Yeah.
I don't have a Ivy League degree. I've learned a lot from people who do, but I just think kind of through hard work and doing your best, you can be successful.
Yeah. I don't know if it's okay to call out Joe Patty, but you tell that great story about how Joe Patty started with it was just straight up grit and resilience, and then
Oh,
it was attitude, and then you found the right fit for him in the company.
yeah, Joe Patty, one of our top instructors at Learnit, make a great story relatively short, came to Learnit. I immediately met him. He was referred to me, again, internal referral from Heather D'Angelo, who is our HR manager, who's at Learnit for a couple of years and moved on. And she was not even at Learnit anymore. She referred Joe and said, "You're going to love this guy." And Joe came in, I met with him, and he had a great attitude. And right away I said, "Hey, if you want to take some free classes, and here's a book." And a lot of times you say that to people and they just kind of blow it off. They don't do it. Joe was there the next day. He was in there taking classes. He was reading the books. He was coming back, reporting back to me on it. And at the time, we really needed somebody in sales. And so we hired Joe, and he gave it 100% effort. Everybody loved him, but you could tell early on that he was struggling and it wasn't really his thing. And I looked at him like, "Hey, you know what? This is somebody I want on our team." And we sat down and we discussed. He had a love for technology. He also had a love for acting. And we moved him over into the instructor role. And some people thought, well, he didn't succeed in sales. How do you know he's going to be successful here? And I wasn't moving him into another role just to get him out of one bad situation into another bad situation. I gave him an opportunity because he had those traits, the humility and the integrity and just the resilience that we're looking for.
Yeah.
And it's one of the stories I've got hundreds of people that I'm super proud of, but Joe is really one of them.
Well, and I might have this wrong, but it's a little bit like that scene in The Princess Bride where the guy ends up on the dread pirates Robert ship, and every day it's like, well, I'll probably kill you tomorrow, and he just makes himself invaluable. And if I got the story right, it was kind of like in the beginning, it's like, well, I don't know if we have a place for you right now, but he just kept showing, he literally just kept showing up at the office and had this attitude where you finally said, okay, we'll give you a shot. Is that right?
That's he kept showing up. And again, going back to the young people or even people who are maybe recently laid off, keep showing up, keep putting in the work, and it'll pay off. As for Princess Bride, you'd have to, I'm more familiar with Frozen and Frozen 2, with the age range of my children. So you'd have to either ask my wife or quiz me on Frozen and Frozen 2.
Yeah, that's good.
Or Sing 2.
Yeah. So just to be clear, the recommendation is don't go hassle. We're not saying go hassle people, but don't give up. you don't, it's not, it's like if you don't have that Ivy League degree, it doesn't mean that you can't be really successful, because look, attitude has so much to do with everything.
And I also want to point out for leaders out there, it also doesn't mean if somebody's failing in one position, it doesn't mean that you have to move them into a different position. I mean, some people just aren't a good fit. And if they're not a good fit, it's best to either coach them up or coach them out. And a lot of times when you let somebody go, you're doing them a favor. And giving them an opportunity to move on.
Yeah.
Joe was a situation where he was the right fit, just in the wrong role. As an individual, he's the right fit, but just in the wrong role. So that's important. I see a lot of the people I work with who are managers, and they're afraid to, or they can't let somebody go, so they move them into other parts of the organization. And I always say that's like management 101 not to do, is move a problem somewhere else. It's setting performance guidelines up for individuals, being very clear on what they need to accomplish. And if they're not accomplishing it, it's time to have them move on and give them an opportunity to work somewhere else.
Yeah, nice. Okay, two more questions for you, and obviously if you have more. But if you could give your younger self advice, what would it be?
If I could give my younger self advice, I think it would be kind of around imposter syndrome. And in my book, I talk about what's called the lucky curse. And what the lucky curse is, I was really fortunate to come from a great family, mom and a father with a lot of with a lot that most other people don't have. I mean, we came from a financially successful company, and a lot of opportunities for me to play sports in different leagues and then move on to Learnit. And sometimes that I felt like, well, in sports at first it was like, well, sure, I'm great, I've done great, but maybe it's because I've had other opportunities that some kids don't. But then when it gets to Learnit, it's like, okay, well, yeah, sure, my dad was able to put me in this position, and and maybe I don't belong here. But then what I've realized is that, like in baseball, when you're in the batter's box, it doesn't matter how you got there, it matters what you do. I mean, that matters what you do. And so, and the same thing goes with work. If maybe I felt I didn't belong at certain points at Learnit early on in my career, I've realized that I've worked through it. And sometimes you got to be humble, but you also have to realize, sometimes you do have to go easier on yourself and realize, hey, you know what, and be proud of some of the successes that you had. So my earlier self, I think I really struggled with that, because sometimes kids would tease you like, oh, you have this, you have that, right? And so I think it is part of the reason why I struggled at Pepperdine, going into it, was really excelled earlier on. Then I get to college where everybody's at a certain level, and I thought, well, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am here. And so that was a big learning lesson. That, and I think it's important to really, like I said, you always struggle a little bit with know-it-all attitude when as younger, just getting past that phase so that you can continue to I wish I would have earlier on too taken advantage of more mentors that were available to me.
They kind of go together, don't they? It's like you have a little bit of imposter syndrome, then you have more fear, and then you kind of hang out even more to the things you probably shouldn't.
Right.
Instead of being open.
Yeah, that's a good question, though.
Yeah. Okay, last one. If you had to, again, the title of the book is The Learnitall Leader, and when does it come out again?
April 18th.
And how can people get it?
How you can get it is, I mean, you could probably hit me up and I'll give you a free copy. Or Amazon would be great. You can purchase it on Amazon.
So Learnitall,
or Barnes and Noble or whatever, but yeah.
Damon Lembi and any of the major outlets. And what would you say are the top 4 or 5 takeaways from the book? Your little just that top 4 or 5 takeaways.
I would say the top 4 or 5 takeaways from the book are that if you're a leader, you weren't born a leader, or you're not finished, you're in the making. Okay, so that's one. Number 2, I would say that imposter syndrome and fear are real. Learn to deal with it. work your way through it. Everybody's going to make mistakes. That's another learning lesson, key takeaway from the book. Also, I talk a lot about decision making in it, and not a deep dive, but decision making is really important, in all aspects of life. So focus on learning to how you can become a better decision maker, and overall the importance of learning agility in the world today. You see a lot about Chat GPT and how it takes over. I look at it as more of a supplement, so how you can learn alongside it. Learning agility is important. And then also, I think integrity. I think it's important to do the right thing, and not take shortcuts. So to me, those are really the key takeaways that I try to come across in the book. And of course, share the stories of some of the current and great staff members we have and team members we have that I think a lot of people will be able to relate to, and they could see themselves in these stories, I hope.
Okay, what's next? When's the next book coming out?
I don't know. It took me 2 or 3 years. I mean, it took 28 years to come up with the stories, but it was a tough process. More importantly for me is Learnit and helping support our customers and continue to grow and build the great teams. And what I'd like to say to everybody listening to this is, if I was able to do this, you are too. You know what I mean? So go out there and figure out what you want to do. You may not know it yet. You may not know it in a couple of years, but work hard and do your best and keep learning.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, big guy. Yeah.
Thank you, big guy.
Thank you, Darren.